We're going to take a brief look here, some introductory materials for 2 Peter. So 2 Peter is something similar to what some scholars categorize as a testament. And so as a genre, we can find these testaments in several of the pseudepigrapha. There is a testament of the 12 patriarchs in the pseudepigrapha, also a testament of Moses. And so the way in which a testament works is this is kind of like a person whose last statements to those who follow this individuals, who are identified with this individual. So like in the 12 patriarchs, testament of 12 patriarchs, each of the children of Jacob are speaking, as it were, to their tribe. And so with 2 Peter being like a testament, is if it is Peter's last kind of statement, declaration to those who identify themselves with his leadership. But it also has elements, this letter, to an oral sermon. So we see several metaphors, hyperboles, metonymies. So metonymy is where one thing kind of stands for another. And so we see elements of this, which is what one finds in a sermon. So, but it's got the form of a letter. It's kind of more like a testament, but it also has elements of an oral sermon. So several different things. It also has apocalyptic elements, and where it kind of talks about what's going to happen at the end of the age, the way in which God is going to intervene into human history, how things are going to change, what lies ahead in the future. And so a lot of times we see in apocalyptic literature the ideas of the earth kind of being aflamed, or elements of this age being dissolved, with the idea of kind of a coming of the day of the Lord. These are apocalyptic elements that we also find in 2 Peter. So why is 2 Peter often thought to be pseudepigraphical? In other words, why do a number of scholars think that 2 Peter was not really authored by the Apostle Peter? Well, it has about 57 what we call hapax legomena. Now, hapax legomena is where a word is used only one time in the entire New Testament. So it's not that these words don't occur in other ancient literature, but their only occurrence in the New Testament occurs in 2 Peter. So what this is indicating is that there's a lot of unusual words, words that don't occur anywhere else in the New Testament that occur in 2 Peter. And so that raises some suspicion. The pastoral epistles, the letters of 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, also have a lot of hapax legomena. And so it's not unusual that a particular letter might have a high frequency of words that are only used once. But nevertheless, it is something that strikes attention. It looks like a work attempting to be Asiatic in style. And so by Asiatic, the kind of Greek that is used, the style that is used, makes it look as if it's something that belongs in Asia. But again, this may not be something that is too unusual, particularly if we have a amanuensis, a scribe, who may have this style, who is basically writing things on behalf of Peter. In other words, Peter may speak or communicate his desire, his concerns to his followers, but someone else kind of phrases it in a style that is comfortable to them. It is influenced by Greek philosophy. We see such things as Tartus, which is kind of this netherworld that was popular in some Greek mythology. We have the expression to share in the divine nature, which is again is a phrase, an idea, a concept in Greek philosophy. Certain words are connected to Greek philosophy that are used here: moral goodness, self-control, godliness. Now that last one, godliness, eusebia, that is not a hapax legomena in Second Peter, because this phrase is also used in the letter of Paul to First Timothy. Now there are a number of scholars who also think First Timothy is pseudepigraphical, that it was written by Paul, again because of the hapax legomenon and because of some other features about First Timothy. But here is a concept that occurs in a letter ascribed to Paul, at least, and a letter that's also ascribed to Peter. And so this word godliness has as its kind of basic idea behavior that is in respect of not only the gods, but also the institutions that God sets up. So if one is a good citizen, one is godly because the gods set up governments. If one is a good husband or mother, a good child, one is godly because the home is an institution kind of set up by the gods. So whatever the gods set up, revering those things, behaving in accordance with those institutions, is the sign of godliness. And also, it looks like this author knows Paul's letters. So if this is written by the Apostle Peter, this would be interesting that the Apostle Peter is aware of the writings of Paul. That's not out of the question, since Peter and Paul are kind of contemporaries of one another. According at least to church tradition, they both die about the same time. So it's not unusual to imagine Paul's letters having been written, having been in circulation, and Peter becoming aware of the contents of those letters. So, but these are some of the things that are oftentimes given for why scholars are suspect about the authenticity or the integrity of the letter. So, who was the intended audience for this epistle? Well, it is ascribed to those who have received a faith as precious as ours. So there's a couple of interesting things here in this description. The idea of receiving a faith is using the word faith here in terms of a body of truth. It is not the idea of faith as a simple trust in some fact, or simple trust in some testimony. It is things that people believe in. And so this use of the word faith to describe a body of belief, we again find in the works of the pastoral epistles, 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. So it's not unusual. Doesn't stand as unique within the New Testament, but it's something to kind of note. Since it refers to a second letter, it certainly was intended for those that First Peter was sent, or at least that seems to be a kind of natural conclusion, that this work is based off of a knowledge of another previous letter. Now, it doesn't note precisely First Peter, and it could be that Peter has written a number of letters, which we no longer have, and that this second letter could be gone, so that it doesn't have in mind the content of First Peter. But as some scholars will note, there is a lot of material that is in First Peter that is reminiscent again in Second Peter. So there does seem to be a close connection between the two letters, and so it does seem quite natural to assume that the second letter is First Peter. Well, why was this epistle written? Well, the major concern seems to be about false teachers whose teaching had the effect of promoting immorality. So this is what Peter is concerned about, or the author is concerned about, is behavior of people. Not so much a lot of doctrine, although there are certain doctrines, eschatology, Christology, which we will talk about in another podcast. But these concern is how these doctrines tend to affect the ethical decision making of Peter's audience. One false teaching has to do with the coming of Jesus in judgment and a denial of that. So that this idea that people are going to be in the future judged for their behaviors is being rejected. And because of that, then people feel a license, as it were, to behave according to their own dictates. And the author sees this as kind of a betrayal of the faith that has been received, what was taught, what was being encouraged by the apostolic traditions or by those who originally followed Jesus. They were not people who thought that believers in Jesus could do whatever they wanted or live however they wanted, but that there were some ethical implications from the gospel and some ethical implications from the idea that Jesus is Lord, that Jesus is Savior, and that Jesus is returning. And so this author is trying to stress the need to behave in line with the implications of those doctrines. And Karen Jobes, in her work, suggests that there may be something where the false teachers are influenced by Epicureanism. Epicureanism was a popular philosophy at the time. We have evidence of people who kind of reflect Epicurean views. According to the book of Acts, Paul encounters kind of Epicurean philosophers when he is in Athens. And so one of the reasons why Jobes thinks that this may have been at work or at play in the lives of the audience of 2 Peter is because Epicureans primarily try to avoid pain and live for pleasure. Now, they are not hedonist in the sense that they just do whatever they want, but they want to avoid pain. Now, they will accept pain if the acceptance of that pain is for some greater future pleasure. But they don't typically want to just live, for the day. They do have a kind of a sense of the way in which meaning of life, the significance of life, is tied in with one's ethical choices to live in kind of at peace, or to live in attuned with an order. Now, they are not the same as Stoics, who recognize that, or who espouse the idea that the world is governed by reason. That's not the position of the Epicureans. But the Epicureans are trying to maintain something that will bring the most pleasure to a person without, pursuing pleasures to one's own detriment. So that's why Jobes thinks there might be a possibility that these false teachers are teaching things to Christians so that they too can pursue a life of pleasure, which may engage into some activities that the author thinks is not conducive or not in line with the implications of the gospel. So that's a little bit of an intro then to 2 Peter. And in another podcast, what we will do is look more closely at some of the particular theologies of this letter.